Let's talk about one of the most chilling and, honestly, one of the most perplexing cold cases in American history. We're going to a small town in Iowa where an entire family and their two young house guests were murdered in their beds. It's a crime that left behind a legacy of fear, suspicion, and a mystery that, more than a century later, is still completely unsolved.
Can you even imagine hearing those words? That was the horrifying discovery on the morning of June 10th, 1912. That simple, stark sentence from the coroner's inquest just cuts right to the bone. It captures the sheer brutality that completely shattered the peace of this small Midwestern community. It's a scene that, I think, haunts the town to this day.
So, to really get why this was so shocking, you have to picture the setting. Villisca, Iowa, back in 1912, was this quiet, tight-knit little town, maybe about 2,500 people. It was exactly the kind of place where everybody knew their neighbors. Locking your doors at night, it probably seemed like a totally unnecessary thing to do. And at the heart of this story, we have the Moore family. These weren't just names on a case file. Josiah Moore was a really successful local businessman. He ran the John Deere dealership. He and his wife, Sarah, were deeply involved in their church. And by every single account, they were pillars of the community. They were that family that everybody knew and everybody liked. And the scale of this tragedy, it's just devastating. It wasn't just Josiah and Sarah. It was their 4 children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and little Paul, who was only 5. And to make it even more heartbreaking, 2 little girls from the neighborhood, the Stillinger sisters, Ina and Lena, were having a sleepover after a church event. 8 people. 6 of them were children.
Their last few hours were just so completely normal. They all went to the Children's Day program at their church, an event Sarah Moore had actually helped put together. They walked home around 10 o'clock at night just like any other Sunday. But what they couldn't have known was that someone was very likely already inside their house, hiding, waiting in the attic for them all to fall asleep.
Now, in the aftermath, the town's shock and grief just gave way to total chaos. And what happened next wasn't a methodical investigation, not by a long shot. It was a catastrophic failure of procedure that pretty much doomed this case from the very beginning.
This is what's truly staggering. Hundreds. Before the scene could be secured, local law enforcement, they just let hundreds of townspeople walk right through the Moore house. It became a public spectacle, like a morbid tourist attraction. And in the process, the crime scene was completely and irrevocably contaminated.
It's really just a laundry list of everything you shouldn't do. The murder weapon, which was Josiah Moore's own axe, was picked up and passed around by spectators. The coroner didn't even take notes on the bodies. I mean, this was before advanced forensics, of course, but any chance of finding usable physical evidence, it was just gone. This case basically became a textbook example of how not to investigate a crime scene.
Okay, so with the crime scene destroyed, where did the whispers and suspicions lead investigators? Well, it led them to the first major theory, that this wasn't some random act of violence at all. It was a targeted hit, born from a really bitter local rivalry.
The central figure in this theory was a man named Frank F. Jones, and you could argue he was the most powerful man in Villisca. He was an Iowa state senator, a wealthy businessman, and here's the kicker, he was Josiah Moore's former boss, and now his fiercest business competitor.
So, let's break this down. The motive here, according to the theory, was twofold. First, you have business. Josiah had been Jones's star employee before he quit to open his own rival company, and he took the very profitable John Deere account with him. Then there was personal humiliation. Rumors were flying all over town that Josiah was having an affair with Jones's daughter-in-law. In a small town like Villisca, that kind of bad blood becomes public knowledge fast.
The thinking was that a man of Jones's stature wouldn't get his own hands dirty. No. The theory was he hired a killer. A private detective pushed this idea relentlessly. But after years of accusations and investigations, a grand jury was finally convened in 1917, and they found zero evidence to connect Jones to the crime. So he was legally in the clear, but the suspicion alone basically ruined his political career.
Okay, so with that local feud theory hitting a legal dead end, investigators had to consider a second, and in some ways, a much more terrifying possibility. What if the Moore family and the Stillinger girls were just the random victims of a serial killer who used the railway system to drift from town to town, leaving a trail of bodies behind him?
And this is where it gets really eerie. When you start comparing the details from Villisca to a string of other axe murders across the Midwest around that same time, a pattern emerges. And it is a chilling one. The use of an axe, the crime scene being near a railroad,
and these bizarre ritualistic behaviors, like covering the victims' heads after the fact and covering all the mirrors in the house. It's just remarkably consistent from crime to crime.
So if there was a man from the train, who was he? Well, two main suspects came up. The first was William Mansfield, the same guy accused of being the hitman for Senator Jones. He was linked to other similar axe murders, but he had a payroll alibi that seemed to place him far away on the night of the crime. The second was a man named Henry Lee Moore, no relation to the victims. He was a convicted serial killer who used an axe, and his known crimes bore some truly uncanny resemblances to what happened in Villisca.
So you can really see the dilemma here. It's like you have two completely different puzzles, and neither one has all the pieces. The local feud theory, it has a powerful, very specific motive aimed right at Josiah Moore, but there is absolutely no physical evidence to back it up. Then you have the traveling axeman theory, which has this incredibly strong pattern matching across multiple crimes, but there's no direct evidence that definitively places a specific killer in Villisca on that specific night. It's a total stalemate.
So what happens when a crime this horrific goes unsolved for over 100 years? Well, it doesn't just fade away into history. It transforms. It becomes less of a cold case and more a piece of dark American folklore. Let's look at that legacy.
And this comparison really shows you that strange transformation. The Moore family home, once a symbol of this unthinkable tragedy that shattered a town, is now known far and wide as the Villisca Axe Murder House. It's been preserved, kept just as it was in 1912, and it's now a tourist attraction. You can take historical tours, or, if you're brave enough, even stay overnight.
You see, nature abhors a vacuum, and when you have no answers, no justice, well, stories and legends tend to rush in to fill that empty space. The house is a staple on ghost hunting shows now. Visitors claim to hear the voices of the murdered children. The crime is no longer just a historical event. For better or worse, it's become the very thing that defines Villisca.
And that leaves us right back where we started, with the same question that has haunted investigators and historians for over a century. Was this a deeply personal act of vengeance, planned by a powerful enemy right there in town? Or was it something even more terrifying, the random, meaningless work of a predator just passing through in the night? It's a question that remains, a cold and unsettling question mark on American history.
That's where we'll leave the mystery of the Villisca Axe Murders for today. If you found this explainer helpful, we'd really appreciate it if you'd like it and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into complex cases like this one. Thanks for tuning in.